Radio Waves, brought to you by Red Apples Media and broadcasting out of WLBE My 790 AM out of Leesburg, Florida. And if you're watching us on Lake Sumter Television, you're catching us on Lake Sumter Comcast Channel 13, Bright House 498, and CenturyLink Prism Channel 83. Today we have a couple of guests. Our first guest will be Mr. Joe Ziler, president of Kevco Builders, followed by B.E. Thompson of LifeStream. So let's get to our first guest. Joe, thanks for coming.
Good afternoon. Nice to see you.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to ask you to, tell us a little bit about yourself and then some of the story of your brother's story.
I'm the local president of Kevco Builders. I've owned Kevco for about 8 years here locally. They've been in business for about 35 years here in Lake County. We're a custom home builder here locally, and based over in Eustis, Florida. And we have gotten involved with LifeStream here in the last couple of years due to an event in my family.
Okay, and that event was?
My brother's suicide. 3.5 years ago, driving down the road in Eustis, leaving a meeting that I was in, I had a bunch of missed phone calls on my cell phone. So I started going through them, returning them. One of the calls, my brother lived in Wisconsin. One of the calls was a detective. And a few minutes into the conversation with this detective that answered the phone, I found out that my brother had shot himself and taken his own life about 2 days earlier, and they had just found him.
Wow, 2 days earlier.
2 days earlier, yes. And with my brother's story, it's a little different. He had lost his fiancée to cancer 15 months earlier and never really recovered from it. Of course, the saying goes, you never see it coming. And we
Sure.
truly didn't see it coming, or at least some of us didn't see it coming in the family because we weren't around him every day, and he hid it well. And what I've since learned about suicide is that the people that become resolute about doing it truly hide it. They don't want you to know. They don't want intervention. They don't want you to figure out what they're going to do. They have a plan. They end up at peace with their plan, and they follow through on it on their schedule.
Right.
And that's what made it, very odd with my brother. Was the Thursday before I had spoke to him on the phone. He was talking about, he was a regional manager for U-Haul, intelligent guy, had everything going for him, really. Had talked about coming to Florida and going to work for me. His daughter had just gotten a scholarship to a college in Knoxville, outside Knoxville, full paid scholarship or partial to a college outside Knoxville. I was helping him pick out a car that I was going to buy her for her graduation from high school. She was going to be graduating from high school in about 30 days. We hung up that Thursday night like everything was normal. Love you, buddy. Goodbye. Over the weekend, texted him different pictures of cars. We talked back and forth via text. Texted him on a Monday about one of the car colors. Didn't hear back, but we're guys, so it's kind of wasn't uncommon. Sometimes we answered each other's texts, sometimes we didn't.
Yeah.
And then apparently, from what I have found out since, he got up Tuesday morning, called all of his work appointments, rescheduled them until the next week, and shot himself. Paid his daughter's cell phone bill and then shot himself.
Oh.
Because I ended up the person that looked into all of his finances and took care of everything. The thing that became, it's funny. I will sit and say the most difficult thing of this was having to identify him, but that's been the most difficult long-term effect of it. The most difficult thing in all of this was having to tell my parents.
Oh, Lord.
And my oldest brother lives in Philadelphia. I called him that afternoon, told him what had happened. My parents have been divorced for 30 years, almost 30 years, since 1989. My oldest brother drove to my mom's house in Maryland the next day. I was supposed to be meeting my dad to play golf the next day in St. Pete. And I show up to play golf and tell my dad that my brother's committed suicide. And the resounding thing that I heard from my dad that I just didn't see, I guess the way a parent does, is my dad said, "I've always worried about him."
Really?
Yeah, and I to this day I'm taken aback by it. But he said ever since he was little, I've always worried about him. And then I guess as he got older, and I didn't know that, I didn't realize that he had that perspective of him. He was a little redheaded kid. Everybody always thought he was a little fiery. I just thought he was a punk most of the time.
Right, right.
And he got away with everything because he's a hothead, and everybody chalked it up to, oh, he's just a little fiery redhead. So, yeah. But the guy was, again, it was a month before his daughter was graduating high school. So I had to call his ex-wife, tell her, she had to tell Kara, my niece, which, just started a chain reaction of things. Here you have a 17-year-old girl. Her parents have been divorced for, 8 years at that point, 7 years at that point. She doesn't see her dad that much to begin with. She just is a teenager, so there's that struggle on top of it. Sure. Between them, and now he's gone.
And that's news like that's devastating.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah, and I speak about it at the college, and I spoke about it at LifeStream last year, and everyone always says, "Well, how's your niece?" And
yeah.
My answer is always, she hasn't lived yet, and she graduated high school without her dad. She just graduated college without her dad. She just bought her first house at 20 years old a month ago without her dad. She's going to get married without her dad. She's going to have her first child without her dad. And she's going to wake up at 35 years old, 15 years from now, looking back on all those life experiences where she didn't have her father. Right. And, I've stepped in, a great role. I was, thank God, close to her to begin with, but, helped her through college. She's got a little bit of her dad's personality when it comes to being recluse sometimes. So she goes off to college, decides she doesn't want to live in the dorms with girls because she doesn't like living with girls. So that part of her scholarship was paid. She didn't want to deal with that, so I had to get her an apartment, put her through college, pay for the apartment and all that. So, that's just part of it. But, I try to be there for her, but I'll never be that guy,
No.
And it's hard watching her knowing that she's going to have these hurdles ahead of her, and I know she thinks about it. She just doesn't talk about it as much. My parents don't talk about the effects that it had on them as much. My dad says, I'll find myself thinking about him being on the floor of the basement, and then I instantly make myself think about him being a little kid and being happy.
Right, self-correction.
Yeah, and my mom, she doesn't talk about it much. In fact, the first conversation I really had with my mom at any length was about 3 weeks ago, in 3.5 years. But part of it with her was her father committed suicide when I was 5. So to my mom, there's this stigma that, it might be in her side of the family. And, so my mom she refers to it when people ask if my son died of a horrific accident. She doesn't say the word. She can't bring herself to say the words. I'm here. This is what I do.
Right.
I talk about it. Mm-hmm. I spoke at LifeStream about it. I'm dedicated to the gala, to sponsoring the gala this year. Spoke at it last year. They had a great fundraiser to try to bring awareness to it, to try to make a difference. And I think that, to me, is the therapeutic portion of it.
Sure.
For me. So,
sure.
But I had to identify him, and I have to tell you, it was, after 3 years now, 3 years of nightmares, and they'll go away for months, then they'll come back, and it's a post-traumatic stress thing. And, you'll wake up where someone's trying to talk to you and it's him dead,
Wow.
Disfigured, dead. It's
well, again,
it's a traumatizing thing, and I wasn't prepared to have to do that. And until last year's gala, the night before last year's gala, no one in my family knew that I had to identify him. My dad had found out that I was going to be speaking at the gala. He said, hey, I want to come. I think it'll be therapeutic for me to be there since you're going to be speaking. And I said, well, if you're going to come, I need to tell you some things. And I just put it off and put it off and put it off on telling him. He said, what do you need to tell me? And I said, well, I need to tell you that I had to identify him. You know, I lied to you. You know, you asked me how they identified it, and I told you they used his driver's license. You know, that's not true. I had to identify him.
Well, Joe, let me ask you, why did you choose that route?
Because
was that for your own protection, so you didn't have to speak of it?
No,
or
it was more
asked?
because I was afraid for my parents, out of curiosity, the next question they would ask, which was, well, how bad was it? Because my dad's comment was, well, you know, do you know where he shot himself? And I said, oh, well, I know he shot himself in the head, but that's really all I know. And that's the way I would answer it, because I just didn't, because, you know, the human mind's powerful.
Sure.
You know, good and bad. And, you know, it can put images through everybody's head, whether you've seen it or not, that you'll never scrub out of your memory. So, and I didn't want him to find out while he was sitting at a table at the gala.
In the middle of
with a bunch, you know, it was difficult enough to sit there and listen to me speak. So, but the gala, you know, that was a great event. It kind of gave me a platform to tell a story, and I ended it that night with, you know, for the folks here that don't know someone personally and don't have their own story, now you have my brother's story. You know, you have a story to tell of somebody that you know, somebody that, you know, is a local owner here that's known in the community, a local business owner, and they've dealt with this. They've dealt with it firsthand. And, you know, it's interesting with my Facebook posts and things that people personally that are close to me know. I've had people reach out to me now, you know, people that have teenagers that have problems, adults that I know that have problems, you know, and guiding them in the right direction to try to get some help so they don't end up a statistic that way.
Absolutely. And I think that's a huge part of what needs to be done, is creating that awareness. There's a lot of training. In fact, we'll speak with BE later, but there's a lot of signs. And in my experience, people they don't see the signs. Everybody gets depressed from time to time, you know, and my take is, sure, you can be depressed, but sometimes it's hard to recognize depression. And for those who are living with depression, they're digging a hole that sometimes they can't get themselves out.
You have a situational depression that we all go through with different life events, and then you have clinical depression. And my brother truly suffered from clinical depression. And he ignored it. I mean, he defiantly denied it. You know, I only had to take Prozac because I didn't have a good marriage, you know, were the things he would say. So I'm not taking that anymore. I don't need that.
Right.
Well, in fact, he did need it. You know, he did need something, you know, to level him out. And, you know, to this day, you know, we've all sat. It's funny because I don't have the anger part of it. I haven't beat myself up over it like that. I always looked at it and said, you know, I was always the guy that he'd pick up the phone and call when he wanted to talk to somebody. And this time, he didn't want to talk. He didn't want anybody to step in. He didn't want to talk. So, you know, from that aspect, you know, it's, you know, I get a little bit of peace, where I create my own peace out of it. I'm not sure which one.
Sure.
You know, no one else really has that. You know, everybody else says, gosh, I wonder what triggered it, you know, between Monday night and Tuesday morning. Well, little do you know, nothing did. You know, what triggered it was a long process. You know, come to find out 3 days after he passed away that I'd found out, you know, he changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policies, his 401k, to me 30 days earlier. You know, he planned it. He planned it. And he may not have planned it, you know, that 30 days earlier, that's when he was going to do it, but he knew he was going to do it in the future.
Okay. Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and telling us this story. Best of luck to you, and you'll be speaking. Your niece will be hosting this year's gala. So we need to take a break. Thank you for listening, and we will be back shortly with Mr. B.E. Thompson. Welcome back to Radio Waves. I'm your host, Kris Poliquin, and you're listening to us on WLBE, My 790 AM. Now for our second guest, we have Mr. B.E. Thompson from LifeStream. B.E., thanks for joining us.
Hi, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Well, I'm glad you could make it.
Thank you.
You heard our first guest.
I did.
You know, this episode is clearly about suicide awareness and prevention, first and foremost. So what exactly do you do at LifeStream?
I'm the Director of Development. I do a little bit of everything. I act as a government liaison and communicate with our local, state, and federal government officials. I oversee the grant writing and a lot of project management at LifeStream. I also do a lot of the social media, as well as the marketing and community events.
Okay. Now, and we're going to be talking about one of your big events coming up here soon. But first, I'd like to try to get into, you know, what new information's out there about suicide now.
Well, you know, the one thing that we talk about is that by talking about it, I mean, there is a stigma associated with suicide, and one of the things that we can one of the ways we can overcome that stigma is by talking about it. And so when we talk about it, and it's a normal part of conversation, suicide is preventable. So that's one of the things that we have joined together with the Florida Council on Community Mental Health, we LifeStream Behavioral Center, and Lutheran Services of Florida to join in the Florida Link project and suicide prevention movement called Zero Suicide.
Okay.
And the goal of that project is to identify at-risk youth ages 10 to 24 years of age and link them and their families to services. So that's a big initiative that LifeStream has joined on in the past year. And one of the strategies is a risk assessment, when to do one, how to complete one, and what to do if an individual is at risk. So one of the things that I brought today to talk about was how to identify suicide warning signs.
Okay.
And so if you don't mind, that's one of the things I'd like to cover.
Not at all. Very much so.
So we wonder, you know, how to monitor someone or how to look for those signs. And some of the signs are when an individual talks about wanting to die or kill him or herself. Looking for a way to kill oneself, such as searching online or buying a gun. Talking about feeling hopeless or having no reason to live. Talking about feelings of being trapped or in unbearable pain. Talking about being a burden to others, which is something that we hear commonly. Increasing the use of alcohol or drugs. Acting anxious or agitated, behaving recklessly, something more out of characteristic. Sleeping too little or sleeping too much, either way. Withdrawing and feeling isolated from friends and family. And showing rage or talking about seeking revenge. And then, of course, displaying extreme mood swings. Those are all warning signs that someone may be contemplating suicide.
And see, for me, the unfortunate thing about all of those signs are just about anybody can demonstrate one or more of those at any given point in time.
That's right.
I'm not saying someone rages all the time or someone's always, but you do have people who are like, oh, I'm such a burden, and sometimes it's it's not necessarily that they're having issues with depression. Maybe it could be attention, depending on the age group, something like that.
Right.
So my experience is, what can we tell people that will give them the confidence to act if they're experiencing any of these symptoms from somebody that they know and or care about? Because a lot of times people are like, oh, that's just how he is.
Right.
Oh, that's just how he is. And it's not until after the fact, unfortunately, that people are like, I kind of always wondered.
Right.
And my attitude's like, well, if you wondered, but it's hard for those people.
You know, and we
Because they don't want to. If I were to do it to somebody I cared about,
right.
what could happen to me if I was wrong? Would they look at me differently?
That's right.
And I think that's kind of a big step for people to get past. They don't want to, for lack of a better term, rat somebody out.
That's
or,
right.
You know.
Well, and we kind of heard that a little bit when Joe spoke earlier about
Exactly.
his brother and talking with his dad. Joe's dad said he always worried about Mike. And so that's probably one of those signs that you're talking about. And professionals have a hard enough time identifying it. So you can only imagine what an untrained person, the difficulty they go through. And the one thing is that you can't always predict a death by suicide, but you can identify people who are at increased risk of suicidal behavior and take precautions and refer those individuals for effective treatment.
And if someone were to have, I'm sorry to cut you off, but if someone were to have questions about this specifically, where could they get the information? Like on your website?
Right. They can go to LifeStream Behavioral Center. Let me just say this. There are several. Obviously, we are in partnership with many organizations. So there's always www.zerosuicide.sprc.org. Which is a suicide prevention website. Obviously, our website, www.lsbc.net. And then we have a local number and a toll-free number. And I'll just give you the toll-free number. It's 1-866-355-9394. That's our 24-hour access facility. It's open 24/7, 365. Someone is always there to answer the phone, and it's kind of like our equivalent to an emergency room at our psychiatric hospital. It's based in Leesburg, and it is available any time of day.
Not only is it available to those who think they need help for themselves,
right,
but for people who have a concern for another.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and there are some tips that are available. We have literature that is available that we take to a lot of our community events and distribute. We can certainly make that information available to the public upon request. It's published on our website. Sometimes it's difficult to navigate, so if they'll give us a call, we'll certainly send the information to them. But you can ask the person directly if he or she is having suicidal thoughts or ideas. If they have a plan to do so, and if they have access to lethal means. And then there are some tips, in ways to engage someone in a conversation. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you ever tried to hurt yourself before? Do you think you might try to hurt yourself today? And have you thought of ways that you might hurt yourself? And then, do you have pills or weapons in the house? Those are always questions that are typically good to ask if you think that someone is contemplating suicide.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, don't be afraid to ask those questions because you already know what the answer will be. I fortunately have not personally experienced this, but a lot of times people are like, well, do you have a gun in the house?
Right.
Why even ask that? They're going to say no.
Right.
Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Well, no, the answer is going to be no. And it's not necessarily the case.
That's right.
Sometimes they're really trying to reach out for help for themselves.
That's right.
And they're giving you those hints, those telltale signs.
That's right. Asking those questions, a lot of people wonder if asking those questions will trigger something. And statistically, it will not increase a person's suicidal thoughts. It will give you, the person asking the questions, the information that indicates how strongly the person has thought about killing him or herself. And the other thing is, that you always take seriously all suicide threats and all suicide attempts. A past history of suicide attempts is one of the strongest risk factors for death by suicide.
Okay. Well, I'm going to shift gears a little bit because we're coming close to the end of the show. And I really want to touch base on the LifeStream Gala this year. What can you tell us about that?
This year, we are just more than thrilled to have Joe Ziler and the Ziler family, as well as Kevco Builders, as our presenting sponsor. This year's theme is Havana Nights. Our event is going to be Friday, October 21st. from 6:30 to 10 p.m. at the Mission Inn Resort and Club in Howey in the Hills.
Okay, and now Havana Nights, so if one were to show up, I mean, are we driving 57 Chevys? Are we, you know?
It's definitely Havana-inspired activities or festivities, and there'll be Latin music, silent auction, Cuban cuisine. We'll have a cigar roller present, dancing, other entertainment. So this is LifeStream's 45th anniversary, and we've been doing...
That's a lot of years.
It is.
That's a long time.
We've had a presence in the community since 1969. We began at Florida Hospital what was Waterman Memorial Hospital in downtown Eustis, and then in 1971 we became our own nonprofit corporation, and so we've been operating in the community since then. We have 23 facilities in Lake and Sumter County. We have over 650 employees throughout our service area. We have a facility in Orange County, and we have a growing presence in Lake Sumter, Citrus, Hernando, Marion, Sumter, and Orange County.
All right, and again, you can get that information from your website for the gala. That's and correct. Any information that we spoke about today. Well, that sums up our show for the afternoon. B.E., thank you very much for coming.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
And I'd like to also thank Mr. Joe Ziler for being our guest as well. We are Radio Waves, brought to you by Red Apples Media out of WLBE My 790 AM.